these are your topics that we can plug into Raymond's brain to see if a sensible answer comes out.
Yeah, and maybe just as background how this came about, as you said, Paul, when I turned 70, which was a long time ago now, 6 years ago, my kids gave me an author for my birthday, and they said, we want you to write a memoir. And I messed around on and off because I got busy at Carlin and so on, and it took me, I literally just finished it 2 weeks ago. And I decided at the end of it, there's a guy called Byron blah blah, I forget his last name, New York investment banker, who retired and got invited to do a speech, and he realized the speech he'd been invited to do was totally different, or he'd written was totally different than what the audience was told they were getting. So on the spot, he made up 24 life lessons, and then he ended up working on them, and they're pretty Google. You can find them on Google. So I said, well, I wrote the memoir, ended it with a chapter on the future, and then I just sort of brainstormed a bunch of, so what would have been my life? How would I summarize? What would be my Byron list? And I played around with it for 6 months. The book version that Paul had for the interview was not the complete one, so I had 20 life learnings in that he interviewed me on. I lost a couple I actually lost three. I lost 3. I lost 4, actually. You didn't know that. I lost 4. I combined them. And then I actually used Claude and said, here's the book, here's the life lessons. Did I miss anything? And Claude said, yeah, you actually missed one on resilience, which is interesting because I got that out of my book, so I added that. And then I gave it to a couple of 3 people, including Paul, to look at, and because he had already, in writing the book, I gave it to my kids and people of various generations to just see what I'd forgotten or whatever. And I gave it to Paul because he didn't know me very well, and I thought it'd be interesting to see what someone who doesn't know me very well took from him, and he was very helpful, and that's what led to the podcast. And anyway, then they took a lesson out of one of the lessons, said this is worth standing on its own, and the one in a row one.
Yeah.
So that's what we got. So this is I got now.
So let's use that as a segue then to start with one in a row. Let's talk about one in a row, and talk about it in the context of the feedback that you got that said put this in. So it was important to other people.
Yeah. Well, it's a concept. It's a phrase I tend to use a lot. It's number 7. That's what I was looking at. What number was it? Number 7. You get into a crisis situation, or you get into big problems, and the propensity is to get drowned in them, right? Try and figure it all out. And I am known for saying, well, let's just figure out, let's get one in a row done, and then we can get the next thing. And I guess I learned this when I was living in India as a 19, 25-year-old, working in villages. Whatever the issues are you're working on, the important thing in village development was to get one in a row, get something done so that it showed that you were there to make a practical difference to their life. And certainly in growing the business I grew, we went, if you look at it, we went from starting in a basement, so to speak, to being 8,500, 9,000 people, and that journey was just a journey of compounding decisions, a whole series of one in a rows. And so it was interesting. I was reading the New York Times this morning. I read a great article about satisficing, which is a portmanteau of the words satisfy and sufficing, and how in our modern world, people get so trapped in trying to get all the information and figure out. And it's, have you heard of the saying, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good? The one that they use is don't let the best be the enemy of the good. It's obviously the same kind of thing. But this whole concept of good, if you just, you can get lost in trying to figure out the best answer. And so in business, I found, like particularly in moments of crisis, the 5-year plan goes out the window. It's what do we got to get done? What's the next big thing to get done? Let's just do it, and then figure out. Having the 5-year plan in the back of your mind for sure, but that can drown you. You've got to get one in a row, and make that accessible to everybody you're working with. Accessible to yourself, like what the one in a row is. It's going to be very tangible, but also to your colleagues, your people, your organization. We just got to get this done.
There's a component in people who suffer really badly from stress and anxiety around this thing they've got themselves caught in a perfectionist trap.
Yeah.
Where they say, if it's not perfect, I'm not moving, which locks them into a spot where they never move.
Yeah. Satisficing is an interesting word. I hadn't run across the concept. If you do subscribe or Google the New York Times, it's a really good article. It's in today's paper.
Can we connect number 7 to number 13?
Sure.
Because
connect
I think
whatever you want. What's number 13?
Number 13 is
I'll lead with trust.
Yeah, because I think the one in a rowing during a crisis, the key component there as well is building trust, right?
Yeah.
Well, were you always good at that?
Oh, no, obviously not. I think you grow up, in a sense. I grew up a generation before, even the oldest of you here. I think I grew up on a time where trust was more easily granted, so to speak, or you assumed it. I grew up in Clarendon, and, walked to school by myself for 2.5 miles from when I was 5. So, it's a very trusting environment. And so I think that was there. But I think I really, again, learned it in my young days in India, where living in villages with different castes, and this was in the very early 70s, and the caste is still very much a reality in India, but it was structurally more of a reality in those days. And trying to break through the barriers of caste and to create community and all of that. You had to decide, do I start from I trust you and then work from there, or do I start from you have to earn my trust or I don't trust you, which is the flip side of that, I guess. And I began to see that sort of trust is really the inevitable force behind any enduring relationship. And when you're working in a village as a foreigner, it starts with trust. If you don't have fundamental trust, then no matter what your intentions are, it's not gonna work. And you win that trust by many things, by going into people's homes and drinking their tea and so on, by living in the village and sleeping on the same floor they do, and so on. But then I took it into business, and 2 or 3 of our biggest relationships came out of trust. We didn't, we negotiated a deal with Household International, which got bought by HSBC, but it was a finance firm in the U.S., to partner with them, and they helped us. They were a client. They were our biggest client. They helped us set up our first development center in India. We had no contract. It was all done on word of mouth. And as the CIO, information officer, said to me, look, don't worry, Raymond, I know where you live. In other words, and so you could have spent months. It would have taken the lawyers, we'd have probably never got the deal done, right? Because the lawyers would have had apoplexy about what they were doing, because what he did was literally advance us 3 months of payment for work that gave us the cash flow we needed to get this thing started. And if he'd had, and he had the authority to do that, obviously, but it was based on trust. And I've just found that that a culture of trust, and so when we did our work on organizational culture, which is the thing I'm most proud of in what we built as a company, it was very much founded around trust. So for instance, we had a set of values and behaviors and all that kind of stuff, but things like T&E, time and expense management, our business ran on time management because we billed in those days by the hour, right? But expenses, we just trusted people to be truthful. And, you know, I trusted that the values of our business were so deeply, were so deeply ingrained that if someone wasn't, their peers would take care of it. The system didn't have to. And the amount of expense it would have cost us to manage it versus just trust, put your expenses in, tell us why you did it, sure, give us a receipt because we're going to have that. But whether it was the right decision, I trust you to make that call. Should you have taken so-and-so to lunch? Was it a necessary expense? That's your thing. If you can figure that out, just put it in.
Could I throw in almost a counterpoint to that in the sense of, for example, potential evidence that trust may not be there. If we're talking about we just trust you to run your own thing, is when for those of you who weren't here this morning, forgive me pointing at the board, but evidence of, if you've ever had the people within the organisation saying that I bring in more money, so I should get more of the shared service, more of the HR, more of the accounting, more of the property, all of that sort of stuff, where you get the expense duck shoving going on in that sort of fake budgeting. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about
trust is not naive, right? I mean, it's not being naive. Obviously, if someone screws you, you get out of that relationship. Yeah. And if one of your employees is doing that, you get out of it as well. But we did it not over against you were fiddling with your expenses. What you were fiddling with was our values. What you were violating was our behaviors. So we had a set of 7 values, and for each value, we had 3 behaviors that we expected of every individual. In other words, if you're going to be we call them success factors. If you're going to be successful in this organization, here are the behaviors that lead to success for this value. We had 3 behaviors that you could expect from the company, the business, and we had 3 taboos. Do that and you're out of here. And the only time we fired people, really, I mean, we did fire a few people for performance, but after we'd given them about 3 shots at it. But we were brutal around people who violated our values. And I let go the most important person in our company at a time when it probably cost us 2 years of growth because he violated a very fundamental value of our business. And we did it in a way that didn't humiliate him, but the word got around. I didn't believe in public executions. You don't really need them. You can, if you've got a set of values, and all of a sudden the most important guy is not in the business anymore, you start to figure it out.
Can I just ask a question
Sure.
on that? Because I've listened to the leadership chat you had with
yeah.
Paul 3 times, thankfully. That was really helpful. Thank you for sharing that information. I take it the list isn't necessarily in order of importance, but
no.
And the second
There's
question,
7, no.
And the second question being about, could you talk a bit more about the ownership mentality and how you ingrain that in the organisation? Because clearly it was a very large organisation, and for people towards the top the top of the hierarchy, that's easier, probably easier to ingrain. But how do you get it throughout the organisation, or how did you?
Yeah. Well, that's not a simple question. Over time, and when we started, when we put our, let me just step back. When we put our, so we were about operationalizing corporate culture. So what got me to start the business was I'd spent 18 years in the nonprofit world, 7 of them living in villages in India, but then moving around the world, troubleshooting, doing fundraising, all kinds of things. And in the nonprofit world, obviously, you don't motivate people by money anyway, but there is an illusion that somehow money is a motivator. You motivate them by aligned vision, by teamwork, by the values that you have in common, and all of that. And I was interested to see, could the let's just call it the leadership philosophy of the nonprofit world that had been very successful, could that work in the profit-making environment? And that's kind of what motivated me to start the business, other than the fact that I was broke, divorced, and had 2 kids. But and so we really focused on operationalizing corporate culture. In other words, not talking about values like a list on a wall, but how do you drive it into everything? So our 7 values and the behaviors made it real in terms of what you expected of people and the people expected of us or the company and so on. But also they were in through our systems and our processes, the way we wrote software. Those values were part and parcel of that methodology. So the ownership mentality, so we value an ownership mentality that encourages innovation and risk taking was the value. So then the behaviors of that, I'm trying to remember. So I will say on the behaviors, our top team of senior executives would spend half a day to a day every 6 months re-looking at the behaviors and changing them, because the values never changed, but the behaviors we wanted to emphasize changed based on what was happening. But a very good example would be for an individual working on the coal face of a software development project. If the client wanted something, the answer was yes, and often our most junior people were the ones who found this out, right? Because they're the ones talking with the people at the coal face, and then they would raise it up, and so the ownership mentality was, I want to do, I'm an owner of this business, I want to do what's best for the client, and we're going to then figure out how to get that done. Now, it doesn't mean you said yes to everything a client wanted, obviously not, or you'd have gone broke, but it's also around taking responsibility for your choices, which is a very different thought than taking responsibility for your decisions. I can't always manage the outcome of my choices, but I can take responsibility for the choice that I made, and said, look, it's the choice I made at the time. Maybe I'd make a different choice today in hindsight, but it's the choice I made at the time. I made it for these reasons. Boom, I own it, and I own the consequences, good, bad, or ugly. So an ownership mentality got, and then of course it was infused in our systems and processes. So it was not true that all 8,500 ended up having options in our company, because as we got very large and went public and so on that. But when we sold to Capgemini, 73 people in our company became millionaires overnight in liquid form, not in theoretical form, because we took 35% of our equity and gave it to employees in the form of options. And that was a symbol that only worked and made sense because of the broader corporate culture that we were operating in. If we hadn't had that culture, that would have been it would have been nice, but it wouldn't have had the same meaning. But it was the organization and the owners putting their faith and saying, look, this business is successful not because of the three of us who founded it, or not because of me as the chairman and CEO of the business. It's successful because we're all in this together. We're all a team. And so, the person who was the second receptionist in our business became, had more than $1 million of cash in her bank account the day that deal happened. And she was a critical person in our business. You wouldn't believe how critical she was. And it's important that the person who was the receptionist, who did other things as well, was aligned with everybody in the organization.
Right.
I don't know, does that help?
Thank you.
Just a question around transparency and how important that is in the trust
Mm-hmm.
motion, especially in context of significant change.
Mm-hmm. I think transparency is really important. So we had a very open book process from day one. Everybody in our company knew how we were performing financially. There are some things you're not transparent about, in the sense of there'd be some people care issues that you don't put up in lights, or there are certainly some some of the relationship with customers you don't put up in lights, but we put all our internal stuff up, so everybody knew how much money we were losing every year. because we were losing money every year. We ran the business for 10 years to where our aim was to lose money, because we didn't want to pay, we wanted to reinvest every penny back in the business. As I said in the podcast, I paid myself what I could earn as a taxi driver, so that I was never going to put my family's livelihood at risk because of the business. And we did that for 10 years, and we poured everything back. And some of that investment was good, some of it was bad. You don't know all that until it happens. But that was all very transparent to people. We would publish but in town meetings, we started doing, gatherings of our staff every quarter originally, and then every 6 months. And we were just very transparent about all that stuff. They knew what our revenue was, they knew what our margins were. I mean, because if they don't, how do they know how to behave?
One of the things that came up this morning, Raymond, was around psychological safety as well.
Yeah.
And where when you're at the top of the tree, the psychological safety is the right of everybody else except you. But also, and this constant dissonance that if you're the CEO of the organisation, you've got this constant dissonance of when it comes to this transparency. So how different people have a different view of how transparent you're being. For example, they'll ask you a question and your inside voice is saying, I know the full answer to this question, but I'm going to give you a part of the answer. And because it's, you're also weighing up things like no good deed goes unpunished, or do I trust you not to share? Can I give you all of the information? So managing this dissonance around transparency and holding trust, while at the same time being discreet around how much you're able to share with different folks. What advice would you give to CEOs around managing their own safety and around how much to share and whether that's a risk to truth? Trust, not necessarily truth.
Well, yeah. Good question. If I don't answer it, come back to me. So it goes back to that first thing about my default position is trust. So I would tend to overshare. And I would tend to, part of that oversharing could be saying, there's parts of this I can't discuss with you. So just saying that gets it out on the table. I'll tell you what I can tell you. There are other things I can't tell you. Right? Yeah. The concept of psychological safety was addressed through the fact of our operationalized corporate culture. What was expected of me as a CEO was the same thing that was expected of the last person we hired yesterday. So we were consistent. So, for example, one of the things that was expected in our organization was that everybody would do 80 hours of learning development a year. And if you didn't do it, you certainly didn't get a bonus if you were eligible, we were paying them that year. But also, if you didn't do it after a period of time, it was such a violation of our culture that you would not be, you'd go. And that was true of me. I had to do my 80 hours. It wasn't.
Did you say 80 or 8?
80, 2 weeks,
Solid.
10 days. Yeah, it was based on, we were in the software world, right? And Scott McNeely, who was the CEO of Sun Systems, gave me, not that concept, but gave me the concept of, he said that the way they looked at it was all of their people effectively lost a quarter of their knowledge every year. In other words, if you weren't refreshing, the world's moving so fast, and with AI now, it's even moving faster, right? You got to constantly be relearning. Now, our people would have done way more than 80 hours because they did lots of it on their own time. They would have done way more. But what set the platform for the way more was that we they had in their timesheets, they had to cover 80 hours of learning and development, whether that was a seminar. You know, there were lots of ways you did it. I mean, I did it through going to conferences, going to a seminar, sometimes making speeches where I would have to, you know, really learn and figure out what I knew in order to make the speech. I mean, but I could show you my 80 hours, and I did way more than 80 hours anyway. But everybody did, and people, it was just part of being Canbay, is you just did continuous learning, and it was so critical for our success, and because our business was always changing, and not as dramatically as I think AI is changing technology, but it seemed pretty dramatic at the time. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Not really very well.
It's a very tricky question that came up this morning, where this balancing act of this balancing act of where trust sits, and I wanted to talk about number 14 as well, where you talk about seeing people before differences, and this idea of dignity, when not everybody behaves the same way in the organisation. One of the things,
should hope not.
Yeah, one of the things
It'd be a boring organisation.
Well, one of the things that came up as an example was where somebody's leaving the organisation, or is being pushed to leave the organisation, or another challenge that came up for me this week in talking to the owner of a business is where their business is being really successful, they're growing really fast, and one of the first employees is now a problem.
Yeah, that is a problem.
But they're
Is there a cling glass? Is that one? Sorry, I just got something caught on my throat.
So this one is.
That one is?
That was
Thank you.
cool.
All right. Sorry.
This person now is
no, I get it.
much loved as well, but the business doesn't need him anymore. And so there's this dissonance now of culturally, and this person is also seen to be friends with the owner because they're very close.
Yeah,
so the part of the challenge for them, and the part of the challenge that I raise, is now you're both stuck, because they can't grow, but you can't raise it, and people now are watching it.
Why can't you raise it?
Well, they felt they couldn't raise it.
Of course you can raise it.
Yeah. How would you raise it?
Well, I think no matter who you are, you basically have the same wish, which is to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected. So the seen part in this analogy is pointing out the bloody obvious. It's obvious to everybody. I assume, I don't know this particular case, but it's and it's probably obvious to the person.
Yeah.
So acknowledge the obvious.
Yeah.
That's, that would be the be seen. The be heard is, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And then the be respected is, let's figure out the honourable solution, whatever the honourable solution is. So, and certainly in our business, we always strove, I wouldn't say we were always successful, but we always strove that any time people left, they left as friends. And we had a phenomenally strong Canbay alumni. And that alumni really helped us. It really helped us. And people came back too. I mean, it was actually really good in some cases to, as it were, kick people out of the organization as friends. They picked up something, and then they came back. But so in this case, the respectful response may well be, give them a 6-month window to figure out another path. The respectful response may, I don't know what their role is, but the respectful response may well be to say, you're no longer going to be the chief operating officer or the chief this or the chief anything else, but you're such an important part of this thing. If you think you can give up that and be part of the organization, we're prepared to keep you on, but let's keep talking about it. But it's co-creating that response is the respectful thing for someone who's a valued employee. But the worst thing is not having the conversation, not stating the bloody obvious, because everybody knows. I bet you.
Yeah. There's a tricky.
It's not that. I mean, I don't think it's that hard if you keep it simple.
Well, the one of the things that came up this morning, and I've experienced it myself, is where you think you've done that, or you are doing that, and you're leaving, or you're having the honest conversation, and you want to maintain their dignity, so you say something that's encouraging or whatever, and the next time you hear those words is in federal court when they've touched you up for some kind of thing.
Well,
and
but that's just part of the way of having it, right? And those kind of conversations are rarely best had. There is an element that can be one-on-one, but the really important parts of it should always be a couple of three people, or a couple of people, and not a lawyer, not even necessarily the head of human resources or whatever it's called in your organization, but someone else who's there to participate and it's be very nice if they were somewhat peerish, but they don't have to be, to the person you're talking to, so that it's not Raymond's pissed off with Paul, and he's, it's look. But I think it starts back with this thing of this is what we see going on. Get back to the what, and it's either going on or it's not. And if it is going on, they know.
One of the things we've talked about is a shortcut that's a false economy. With Cole did this thing around an event happens, and then there are feelings, and then you do a plan, and then you take action. But under time pressure, you skip the feelings bit and just go straight to the plan and the action. And then find yourself in this morass of going, why doesn't anybody follow the plan? It's like, because you don't
that's
care.
a good point. And in these kind of conversations, and in other sensitive conversations, you need time. You're not going to solve it. I mean, you can't solve it elegantly in a day or two. You need time. People need time to process. They need the time to go through, whether it's the stages of grief or whatever, people need the time to process. And I think my responsibility as a leader is to make sure that environment for processing is there, that it's safe, that it allows people. So that may be saying, go take a couple of weeks, I'll send you on a research and reconnaissance mission to go explore this, go look at this. And use that time to just think about all this and process it. Feel free to call me anytime, but take a bit of time to yourself. Kind of relates back to one of the other ones of taking time to giving yourself the time to reflect.
Yeah, is time one of those things, like it's fashionable now to say, hey Raymond, how you going? Have you been busy? As if being busy is good, or is a substitute for good. But is it different now to say any period before, or say is this value placed on time? It's hard to consider that you can build trust without applying time to building trust, but everybody seems to be busy, activity.
Well, it starts with yourself, right?
Yeah.
You can't build trust with yourself without time. I'm always amused. I live on a farm up near Eagle on the Hill, and we have a lot of walkers through our farm, and which we encourage. We've put in walking trails for them. But I bet you 95% of them have headphones on and they're walking. And so even their walk is actually not time to themselves. And I think, wisdom grows sort of, well, like I said, in the space between experience or busyness and doing nothing. And my clearest thinking anyway is it's interesting. When I came back in 2009, my wife asked me what I wanted to do for Father's Day, and I said, what I want to do is take my two boys, who at that stage were 11 and 9, and have you drop me off at my old house on the farm, and we're going to walk to school. Because they never used to believe that I walked 2.5 miles uphill both ways, by the way, to school. And so we did this walk, and I used it as just like a chance to talk about my growing up. And this is where one day the snake was across the road and I was scared and I was late for school and the teacher didn't believe me and it pissed me off and stuff like that. We had told all these little stories. But I realized only recently in writing the book that 7 years of walking, well, more than that because I walked the bus anyway. So 12 years of walking to school by myself was actually where I did a lot of just solitary thinking. And but because I think insights really come in stillness. And this is one of the, like when I was I used to go around the world like 10 times a year to visit our offices. I would always fly by myself. I mean, I hated it when I had to fly with a car. I would manipulate it so I flew, because that was the one time in my life that I could get away from. If I was flying with someone, man, that was the way they had me. You know, if they were sitting next to me, it was horrible, because I needed that space. It's why I got into meditation. It's why I did a Vipassana 10-day silent meditation retreat. Hardest work I've ever done, except teaching preschool. You know what you discover about yourself in 10 days of silence, and is amazing. And I still have that. I don't meditate at 6 o'clock in the morning every day. I meditate when I meditate, but I still have that capacity to be able to afford myself solitary time, and I think it is really important. And the thing about meditation is not that your thoughts stop, because they don't, of course not. But you just, as the Buddha's saying, is being aware and equanimous. Yeah. I'm no longer focusing on my breath. I'm thinking about how my wife pissed me off. Back to the breath. Oh, I'm no longer focusing on my breath. I'm worrying about the speech I have to go give with Paul. Back to the breath. Just learning that capacity to become aware. And then equanimous. Don't judge yourself. Opens up space to allow you to make decisions and think. And I think if you don't do that, so I think busyness is the antithesis of success. I think success is nothingness. And then out of that nothingness, you can be quite creative and do lots of things. But if you get busy, and you tend to panic, you tend to be anxious, your body gets tight, you get tired, you don't sleep well, it always just builds up. So in times of crisis, it's even more important to not be busy.
Questions? Topics that are burning for you at the moment?
Thank you for putting this one pager together.
That was really.
I'll steal that.
That was really great just then. That was very profound and helpful. Can I take back to something you said earlier though around the sort of transparency and psychological safety? I've tried to be really transparent, and sometimes it just particularly around finances and things like that, and it often creates a feeling of then amongst some of the team that they're not safe because it freaks them out or it distracts them and those things. How have you balanced that? Because the transparency you were saying before, you can overshare sometimes, and
but we had a very specific example in our somewhat early days, 4, 5, 6. Our business was very slow to take off because we didn't have any money, and so it took us 9 years to go from nothing to 30 million US of revenue, and then we took off. But so in those early days, there's only one thing we focused on, which from a financial perspective, which was cash flow. We didn't give a crap about profit. We cared about cash flow. It was all about cash flow. We did obviously give some concern about it, because if you're just losing money, you eventually run out of money. But cash flow was key. And so a couple of times we had to go, this is when we had maybe 30, 40 people. We had to go to employees and say, look, our cash flow, here's our cash flow. We can't meet payroll this Friday. we'll meet it on Wednesday because we've got a payment coming in on Monday. And because we were transparent, and we didn't just go to them with the problem, we went with here's the solution, here's what we're doing. This is not, you are gonna get paid, you'll get paid on Wednesday, and then you get paid again the next, I think we used to get paid monthly actually, but you get paid late this one, but you'll be paid on time next time, and here's what it's looking, but we got this temporary little hiccup because blah, blah. Now people could have, but people are gonna know if you can't pay them. So, again, my bias was, if you were part of this business, if you had the benefits of an owner, as it were, and those benefits in those days were not financial as much as they had a voice. We'd have, like in our planning sessions, our visioning sessions, our quarterly planning sessions, we'd have the whole 40 people in the room. We'd do it on a Saturday and a Sunday because they were clients Monday to Friday. And they valued that they were creating the plan. So they owned the plan. And but it's not simple. I'm not saying it's simple. And yes, you can get burned. But I think just putting that out there as the context, I'm sharing this. I believe you're a human, you're a big enough person, you can handle the complexity. The mistake we make is thinking you're the only person who can handle the ambiguity of the problem. Whereas in fact, everybody in your business is probably big enough to handle it at one level. Not everybody can affect the outcome, obviously, equally, it depends, and so on. But they're all going to be affected by it in this particular example I used. So therefore, be open with it. And say, hey, we're all in this together. We're going to get through this. And I'm not just saying that. Here's how we're going to get through it. Boom, boom, boom. And we did. And then, you got to deliver what you said as well as they got to deliver what they said. And then when someone violates that, I think that's when you got to have a sit down and say, we are what we are. Funding for organizations that advocate for the homeless, that don't have a $20 million endowment, is going to be up and down. We are a fragile organization. And what's going to make us not fragile is all of us pulling together to make this business a success.
The difficulty with transparency is, where does it start and stop?
No, I understand.
So, if you're running a private organisation or at a board level, if you're expecting transparency from staff, they'll expect it 2 times, 3 times back from you. And I think in Australia that's I find that difficult to manage, because there's always the tall poppy syndrome, or I'm only receiving X amount of that. So it's really challenging to get that how you manage the pros and cons of it.
It is. So in our business, everybody was on some sort of compensation at risk. The amount was hugely variant.
Yep.
The lowest level, maybe they had 5% of their total cash compensation was at risk.
Yeah.
We actually had a 3-tier compensation system of a base, a target bonus, and that represented your total cash compensation, and then what we called, before we were public, a long-term. What the hell was it called? Anyway, it was a 3 or 4 year fund that built up over time based on the performance of the business that people had units in. So it was a phantom stock plan because we didn't have stock. I mean, we had stock, but the stock was. So we had various levels. Everybody knew the structure of our compensation. As the CEO, I had 50% of my compensation at risk, so my base was X, my target was 2X. And the idea of the X was it was enough to keep me in my house, live on. But Then we also had, as part of our system, at the senior level, so we had a global leadership team that was about 8 or 9 people. We rose and fell as one, and we operated as one. So we never talked about, we talked about my role as CEO as the first among equals, but we operated as a team. We either all got a bonus or none of us got a bonus. And that included, there were some people on the team whose bonus was maybe 50% aligned to the performance of their business unit. So they might have been running one of the 2 or 3 business units, and the CFO, probably 100%, CEO certainly 100%, the chief people officer 100% was on the performance of the company. But even those people didn't get their bonus unless we were all getting something. They might end up getting more, but it was all very transparent. Everybody knew. I mean, it was all worked out around the table. And fundamentally, everybody knew what everybody was paid. I mean, if I was running the business the way I would have liked to, if I would have put everybody's salary on a poster in the kitchen, because everybody knows anyway, or they think they know, and they're often wrong in exaggerating how much you're making. And of course, when you're public, you do know. I'll never forget my son, who was 9 years old at the time, David, and you know David, wanted something, I forget what. I can't even remember what it was. And we said no. And he said, well, you can afford it. And I said, well, how do you know? He said, well, last year you made, because it's published, right, what I made. I said, well, it's got nothing to do with what we can afford. It's got to do with what we're going to allocate to you. And the answer is no. And the same pretty much applies throughout the business. You might as well put salaries up on the bloody fridge. I mean, again, and what we did put up on the fridge was very much around the structure. So everybody knew that my target compensation was, my base was 50% of what my target was. And my competitive salary was about 75% of my peer group, because we always paid in the top quartile, but mine was at the base of it. And that if I was going to make more money, it was going to be based on what the value of the shares were worth eventually. People knew all that. So we tried to overpay, not overpay, but in that top quartile, all of our key people. But we put, and when they got their bonuses, they would have been at the very top of that quartile, for sure. But that was a risk, because some years you did, some years you didn't get it. The mistake is bonus programs that everybody assume you're actually going to get. It's not. I mean, it's a risk. It's at risk. That's the word, risk.
Bonus programs, boy, we can spend a whole day talking about the pros and cons of bonus programs. One of the things that I reflecting on what you were just saying then, that I set as a goal for myself as we got bigger and bigger, was that nobody had to ask for a pay rise. I tried to get in front of them and give them one before they asked for it. Didn't always win at that, and I always didn't always get the number right when I'd go to them with a pay rise, and you could see the look on their face was like, oh. But others were like, wow, that was I wasn't expecting that. So, David, you had a question.
Yeah, Raymond, this is gold, so thank you very much. As you may or may not recall, my career is almost like the inverse of yours, in the sense of I went from a farm to the international business world, and then went to a not-for-profit and international development. And yours was sort of the opposite of that. But I guess that combination of
back to it now.
Community development, doing international development, and all that sort of stuff, and then a business. The combination of those two, today, so many of us. So whether we're in a private enterprise or a not-for-profit, if you're a not-for-profit, you've got to have a lot more business discipline to what you do, just to be able to do it well. Yeah. If you're a private business, you need to be much more conscious of your impact on the community and social responsibility. So I just wonder, out of those two, if you think of it almost like a pincer movement on what advice you would give people today in Adelaide, how do you actually combine the best of those two backgrounds that you have.
Yeah. So the most fundamental thing I learned living in the villages in India was that the meaning of life is not found by what you have or who you know or any of that kind of stuff. It's found in who you be, how aligned, how comfortable you are with your life, how aligned with what's in your soul or heart or guts is with the way you play it out. And so, as I'm sure you did in your organization, nonprofit organization, you really work at building a common vision, so everyone in the organization is aligned around that vision. You work at building common values, which I've talked about. You work at building benefits that are human. So, like, I was so lucky. I don't have a degree. I did 1 year of university, went to law school for a year. But I feel like I've got 10 degrees because the nonprofit organization that I operated in had a very serious learning and development program. Very, very serious. It was a learning organization way before Covey thought of that term. And it was serious, and that's a huge benefit, right? But I also learned just that people are people, just to respect people. So this is a little crude, but one of the deeper relationships, I had 2 really deep relationships in this village. One was an older man, and it's interesting, I was 20, so he was probably 35, 40, I don't know, called Chokababa, who was the leader of the Buddhist community, which were the Harijans, the outcasts who had converted to Buddhism. And the other was a farmer who was of a higher Hindu caste, who was not the wealthiest person in the village, and wealthy is in quotes, but anyway, the 3 of us used to wake up at about the same time. So one had to wake up when it was still dark, because when we first got into this village, there were no toilets or anything, and you do your ablutions out in the field, and it's just better if it's done in the dark. And so we would inevitably run into each other, going out or coming back. and we do our stuff, come back, and go to one of, I would go to one of their 2 places for tea. And Suryavan, who was the Hindu, was more than happy to go have tea made by Choki Baba, which is not everybody was. There was the outcast or the Harijan or the Buddhist community over here, and we're also. And we became really, really deep. We'd have these fascinating conversations in broken Hindi and broken English. And a lot of it was, we didn't even communicate, but just sitting there having tea was really deep. So I think you learn in the nonprofit world that fundamental sense of the value of appreciating human dignity, and that everybody is a rich person. Everybody's got something to offer. And the third thing I learned, which was critical for me in business, was I don't give a shit about the money. Money is not relevant to me. I have some, not as much as people think, but I've got some. So money is not a factor in my life today. But if I lost all that money, and I used to say this to people all the time, and it's still true, the great gift I got was that I always used to say, before I had money, pray that if I go broke, I've got enough money to get to Mumbai. Because there's at least 10 families in Mumbai I could go knock on the door and say, hi, I'm home, and I would be accepted into their family, if I didn't have a family. So you learn that, right? By learning the irrelevancy of you could hear me. You could hear what I'm saying is kind of arrogant or pious or whatever. That's not the way I experience it. I truly believe that if I lost all my money tomorrow, I'd be fine. Because doesn't define my life. The house I live in doesn't define my life. The money I got doesn't define my life. My titles don't define my life. They're irrelevant, they're passing things. What defines my life is the stuff that I really hold important. And so I've made some decisions, one of which Lindsay's very aware of, in the last 6 to 9 months that are quite controversial in terms of decisions I made, because I was out of alignment with the most fundamental values in my life. And I wasn't gonna persist in that kind of a situation. That's what you learn in the nonprofit world. In the profit world, you learn the importance of process and systems. You learn the importance of disciplines. You learn the importance of, in the US, quarterly public company account. Every bloody quarter you got to stand up and give reports. And you learn the importance of what you can say and what you can't say. I had this phenomenal chief of staff, young guy. He was great. We'd have some real knockdown drag out sometimes. But his sole job during the earnings, when you did your earnings calls and then you had to do analyst meetings, was to keep track that I wasn't saying anything that I couldn't say. Because you always know stuff that you haven't said, you haven't made public. And if you say it to one analyst, you got to do a press release and make it known to everybody. So you learn those disciplines, right? You learn the communication disciplines, you learn all that stuff. And then I was lucky enough to be able to put the two together. And I'm very clear that whatever success I enjoyed came as a result of both. It wasn't one was more important than the other. I think that's sometimes a bit of a mistake people who come from the journey I did make, that my important learnings were in the, doing the altruistic work. That's bullshit. I had really good learnings there. I also have really good learnings from 20 years in business and running a public company running one for 3, and then an additional 2 is running a $2 or $3 billion piece of a public company. Tremendous learnings that are equally important. And I wish I had known those learnings when I was in the nonprofit world. And that's part of what I was trying to capture in my memoir, was how to fuse some of that. I don't know if I have or not, but does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, indeed.
Another question? Go back.
Thanks, Raymond. I have a continual challenge of enjoying taking my team on a journey with me, because I'm humble enough to know that I'm not an expert in everything, and I really enjoy the ideas that come from all levels. People have been with me a long time, or people that started yesterday.
Good.
But also balancing that with not giving too much of my power away, because it's my company. And sometimes there's been opinions and things that, that some people in the organisation are wanting to go in this direction, I want the company to go in this direction. How do you balance that in a way that's still keeping the trust and leaning on folks, but also not just giving your business away for everybody else?
Yeah, good. Well, again, it comes back to this concept of first among equals is really quite helpful, I think. So, I don't know how big your organization is. So in our early days, it was everybody in our organization. And then as we got to a larger number, it was sort of my direct reports and their direct reports sort of made up our broader leadership team. And there's no question, I'm a real believer in the power of consensus. But consensus is not everybody agreeing. Consensus is very much everybody having a voice. And consensus works if you focus on outcomes. It doesn't work if you focus on other things. So we're trying to get this outcome, and we all agree we're trying to get this outcome. So there's the first stage of a consensus, so whatever the outcome is. And it's so easy, so interesting how people quickly jump from focusing on outcome to focusing on a process or focusing on something else. So you got to get agreement around the outcome. And consensus about the outcome is important. But again, it's not, finally, it's, I think, in a smaller business, it's the role of the CEO, or in a larger business, it's the role of what I call the global leadership team, to articulate that. And our organization would have had no idea of the fights we had in the room about coming out. Once we said this is the consensus, that was everybody's position. And there were times when, as the CEO, I just had, we were sort of divided, and I just had to say, okay, I feel like we have spent the time with everybody being seen and heard. We're very clear these are the things, blah, 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 blah. It's clear that we don't have agreement around this. This is the way we're going to go. And you do that. You try and avoid doing that too often, because it would point to a problem of really a lack of attunement within the organization. I mean, the great advantage of having a strong organizational culture is it promotes alignment and attunement. And alignment and attunement doesn't mean everybody's agreeing, but we are aligned and attuned around what's really important, and we are prepared to set aside the aspects we don't agree for the sake of moving forward, knowing we'll always evaluate. No decision you make can't be unmade. I mean, the only bad decision is one you don't acknowledge. Everything else is a learning experience.
We use that as a segue to number 11, which is your get back up. And the way you talk about resilience, it's not necessarily the fashionable way of talking about resilience, but you talk about get back up and this idea of resilience in terms of like a risk profile, your risk management of, in a risk-taking activity, sometimes the risk is so on the edge that you flip over the edge, and that's what you're talking about, getting back up. Do you want to, can you expand a little bit more on what getting back up looks like? And
So
is there anything that you've not got back up from that you've sort of gone, forget it, I'm going to let that go?
I'm sure there is. Let me think about that. But for me, resilience is not the absence of failure, right? It's the refusal to be defined by it. So I've failed lots of times. And it's interesting, I think this is an advantage of, like in corporate, if we think of the corporate world, America's got a real advantage here relative to chapter 11 and so on and so forth. I know 3 billionaires in Chicago, they're billionaires, or they were 15 years ago, who went bankrupt at one stage in their business career. That's very difficult to do. They didn't go bankrupt because they were stupid, or whatever. They learned a hell of a lot from it. They went and started another business. It was very successful. So, resilience isn't toughing it out or gritting your teeth. It's, the only fatal response, I think, is to surrender to failure. Now, have I surrendered to failure? Sure, I have. But not in terms of resilience to my soul or who I am as a human being. I think the dissolution of my first marriage was a huge failure on my part, and not just my part, because divorces, by definition, have two sides. It's rare that a divorce is all the responsibility of one, but and I struggled with that a long time because I was in this nonprofit organization where everybody knew each other. It was kind of like a secular religious order in a sense, because when we were in the village, it might have 3 or 4 families. We'd all be living in the same little like the accommodation was different, but you were together, and there was sort of, it was it had in its early days a sort of a Christian, not a conservative Christian, but a Christian bias to it. So there were moral, connotations. And I also grew up in the 50s and 60s. So I've felt personal failure. I've had some business failure for sure. But I think resilience is the capacity to pull together the resources you need to address the situation you're in. So, and I'll give you a couple of examples. And I learned this in the villages. I mean, I literally learned it, for instance, in India, where you couldn't get a ticket on a train without bribing people, and we didn't have enough money to bribe them, and we weren't going to bribe them anyway. But I could get on a train, the third class sit up, if nothing else, that's all I could afford, because I didn't give up. And I figured out who the hell had the quota and who I could go beg to, and because I had to get on the train. And so one learned to, I say to people in sales, a sale begins after your first no. Selling where you're just selling it, you walk through and get it, that's not selling. Selling begins after your first no. No, we're not going to buy. That's when the sale process starts. So we, like in our business, we got funding in 1997, which, as I said, 9 years. We got to 30 million in 97. We got $10 million of funding. That was very difficult to get in those days because we were not a services companies. The banks didn't lend you money. It was hard to get. You don't have any collateral, right? Your collateral walks out the door every day at 5 o'clock, metaphorically speaking. We were in America, so people worked harder than they do here, so they'd be often there till 6 or 7, but they walk out of the door every day. They come back. You can't bank on anything. But we managed to. One of the better selling jobs I did after a couple of no's with this company was to get $10 million. One of the great things about it was we got them to agree, which is very, very unusual and something I now occasionally agree to in investing, is to take $4 million off the table. So we took $4 million off the table as secondary shares and paid some money to the key employees who had shares, who had been in this business working at way below. I paid myself $65,000 for 9 years because that's what I had earned in Chicago as a taxi driver. And so it got a bit of equity back into the journey that people have been on. And the guy who was the vice chair or the number 2 in charge of this entity came onto our board. He's one of my closest friends today. He took a risk on us. Right? We got this $6 million in, and then we could really, so we went from 30 million in 97 to about 200 million in 2000 of revenue. And we had a 99.999% collection rate. Right? Everybody paid because our clients were the big banks. And other companies like HSBC Household International was the client at that point, not HSBC. But they paid their bills. But then we had .com customers as well, and in 3 weeks, I think it was three or four of our customers went bankrupt, leaving us with $8 million of receivables that we were never going to receive. There was nothing there. And we didn't have, we could get through the next month or so, but no, we were a bit in hot water. So, after feeling sorry for ourselves for a couple of days, we gathered the people, and someone asked the best question, which was, who has the most to lose other than us? if we go out of business? I mean, we had something to lose, but well, clearly the answer was our clients, our best clients. And it so happened at the time, Morgan Stanley were looking at us, and they had chosen us against the really big Indian firms because of our culture, and for the very reason they said that when they visited us in Chicago, New York, London, Bombay, Hong Kong, Singapore, they met the same company, whereas everywhere else they went, they met different companies. And because we were dealing with a global, their global thing, but we weren't public, and so they didn't have any visibility in us, so they wanted to buy some stock, and we were a bit hesitant about that. But we got very unhesitant very quickly. And then we went to HSBC and said, or Household International, sorry, before it became it. And then we said, hey, Morgan Stanley want to invest in us, but we don't think it's fair that they get the chance to invest in us without you coming along, because you've been with us from almost day one. Anyway, they ended up putting in twice as much. So within a month, we negotiated $15 million investment into the company at the more or less the dot-com rate, which was, I don't know how the hell that, because the valuations were starting to fall. But that's an easy story to tell today. But that was the capacity to acknowledge the problem and to experience it viscerally, which we did. But then to say, okay, let's approach this there's a way out of this. What's the way out? And by working together with very disparate people, all aligned around one outcome, the outcome being to keep this business going, because they valued what we were bringing. What we were bringing was quite unique in the offshoring process. High value work being done in India versus just the grunt work and so on. And hey, it's turned out to be a really good story. I mean, again, when we got sold as a public company, HSBC took off $200 million or something. They did just fine, as did Morgan Stanley. Took up maybe 100. So I think resilience is about it's not just about gritting your teeth or it's really about saying all is possible. There is a solution here. Let's figure it out. It may not come without cost. It may not be what you always intended, but there's a solution. Let's figure it out. And if we put our heads together, and when I say we, in this particular case, it wasn't just the executive team of Cambay, it was the executive team of Cambay with a managing director of Morgan Stanley, with half a dozen people from in a household, with a couple of other people that I knew. We got them in the door. We said, here's that, we couldn't hide anything from them. Here's the deal. This is what it'll take. I don't know.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about? I want to get to keep death in view, which is one of those things where you go, oh, that's one to put on. We got 12 minutes left, but I'd like to put that into a context of, if you're the owner of your business, the founder of your business, the owner of your business, or you're a long-term CEO, the question inevitably comes into your head of when is it time for me to stop doing this?
Yeah,
or when is it time for me to leave this? And then the question obviously being, well, how am I going to get out of this? So you did that.
That's good.
So how can you talk about?
Well, I did and I didn't do it. So Cambay started in early 1988, sort of formally started late 87. And I was the CEO, chairman and CEO, until we got sold to Capgemini. And the journey of Cambay, we always talk about it, it was really 5 companies over that period of time. 5 quite different companies. And it's very unusual that a CEO would survive over 5 companies. And part of the reason I believe that, and the first 2 or 3, I was the only choice anyway, but later on I wasn't, that I had the confidence of the management, the board and so on, was because my main competency was leadership. It wasn't anything to do with the business. I couldn't read you a line of code today if you asked me to. And I'm very proud of that fact. And I had 8,500 of the smartest people in the world in writing technology. That wasn't my job. My job was to lead the business. And what did leading the business meant? It meant, number one, creating a business that had an operating corporate culture, that people were aligned and attuned. It obviously meant to make sure the hygienics were there, were good. And, under Sarbanes-Oxley and all that kind of stuff, that's serious stuff. But again, my job as CEO wasn't to do that. It was to have people who did it, to make sure I had the best people. My main job as a CEO was to be in front of everybody in our company at least every 6 months. And I would do town meetings with no more than 200 people in them every 6 months, where we would tell the story of the business, what's going on, answer questions, give out awards, a star award, which was a peer award for who was the people in the team or the room who best lived the culture. They got a little bit of money, they got to take their family out to dinner, but people didn't care about the money. It was that recognition. So there was that. I had to front up to big clients, but I didn't have to know anything about that. I just had to know, what it was doing, what was the outcome that this software was going to do. I didn't have to. I had technical people with me if those things got addressed. So I got really good at getting briefed in an elevator. I remember going to see the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and my flight was late, and we'd supposed to have a 2-hour planning meeting, and people knew me. I ran my business off of 1-pagers. Everybody knew if it's on the second page, Raymond didn't read it. So someone was bright enough to give me a 1-pager. I read it in the elevator, and the 1-pager included what my key lines were. We went and did it. Why? Because I had with me 2 people who could answer anything he was going to ask. My job was not to be that, not to confuse myself with being an expert. So it was about our people, it was about our customers, and then it was about thinking through the future of the business. So I used to say that we had to blow our business up about every 30 months. So we did a series of 5-year visions, and we would redo our 5-year vision about every 30 months. Then you do a 5-year vision, but it runs out after a couple of years, no longer is relevant after a couple of years. And either God gave us a crisis, and God gave us a few crises, so I didn't have to create one, like the .com crisis, or it was Raymond's job to create a crisis. And it was a big joke. Oh shit, 30 months is coming around. We're going to reorganize, or do something, or we're going to start a new country, or we're going to, some crisis, not always bad, right? Good things. But the businesses get lazy. Your team gets lazy. You get bored doing the same shit over and over again. So we'd create a crisis to reinvent the business, to a degree. We've reinvented it, as I said, had 5 lives, but within those lives there would be changes. And I think that was my job. My job wasn't to be the numbers man. I had a great CFO. I didn't need to, I need to understand the numbers, and I know what a balance sheet looks like, and profit and loss and all that kind of stuff. I knew what our key metrics were. That's all I focused on. I had 5 key metrics. The most important one was the conversion rate from level 3 to level 4 on our sales pipeline. Because if that conversion rate slowed down, I knew we were going to have trouble 6 to 12 months from now on our revenue. The second most important one was our retention rate. We were in a business where there was something like 18 to 20% attrition. We never talked about attrition. We talked about a retention. We had a 92% retention. And I watched that like a hawk at all levels. And if we started to notice that going up, I dug into that. I had 3 other metrics. Cash flow, as I said early on, being one of them. So, get me back. I wondered.
This was about you. So if you own the business or you get a long-term CEO.
Yeah. So
there's a point at which.
So I survived this. Yeah.
How do you decide to get out?
Yeah. When I went to Capgemini, so Capgemini bought us, and it was a great deal. They bought us for about 2 and a bit times revenue. They'd come off of a disastrous acquisition 5 years ago of E&Y's consulting business. They didn't want to be subject to Sarbanes-Oxley, so they didn't want to give us stock, so they paid us cash, which was a beautiful thing. So it was a 100% cash deal. All of our shareholders were very happy about that, and as I said, many of our employees were very happy about that. And they didn't tie me down. I could have left. I had the money in the bank, could have left. But I didn't. I didn't want to leave. And I actually really enjoyed my 3 years running. I got the job of starting a new business unit called the Global Financial Services Business Unit. And Capgemini was previously run by geography. And as the CEO, Paul Omerlan, used to say, I've got 44 barons who each run their own. And my job was to go around and pull out the people from their baron, what is the thing that a baron runs? Anyway, their country, to become part of this new business unit. So I wasn't popular with anybody. And I was the only person in the global management board, of which there were 9 of us, who didn't want the CEO's job. So he and I became very good friends because I didn't want his job and he knew it. Anyway, after about 2.5 years, I went to him and said, it was going along fine. We went, I forget, from $1.5 billion as a unit to maybe 2.5 or 3 billion, something in that neighborhood. And I was working with this great guy called Ayman Izzat, who grew up in France, but he was Egyptian by heritage. And I went to Paul and said, look, my times, Ayman needs to run this business. He will take you further than I can ever take you. I think I've done what you wanted me to do. I think it's time to go. And he agreed. He said, yeah, so what I want you to do is stay and be my number 2. And I thought, I can think of nothing worse than staying and being your number 2. So we cut a deal where I stayed as chair of the financial services business unit, which meant I got paid nothing, like $100,000 a year to go to a few meetings and show up occasionally with a client, so that our people that we'd brought in didn't think I was going away mad, and our customers didn't think I was going away mad. So that's when we moved here. So that worked. That worked fine. As I look back on my tenure at Canbay, I've often asked the question, should I have gotten out earlier? I've decided not, and I'll tell you the reason. Where the change happened was in my leadership team. So because we operated as a global management, global leader, GOT, we call it global leadership team. And I never saw myself as the CEO. I saw myself as the first among equals of the brain trust. And the people who were in it were the 3 people who ran the P&Ls, Chief People Officer, Chief Financial Officer, the person in charge of quality, and a couple of others. And we sat around the table as one. And we had this concept hats, there's the black hat, red hat, but this was different. You had to declare if you were speaking as your functional leadership versus, because when we were meeting, we were meeting as the whole organization. And so there were changes within that team. So our leadership got refreshed by bringing in a new chief operating officer, for instance. And I brought one in. He lasted 2 years. I had to let him go. It was not an easy conversation, but he wasn't aligning culturally. still very good friends with him. Again, it wasn't, we know, I let him go in a good way. Acquired a company, and I had put the CEO of that business in as a COO. He was the best operator I've ever seen in my life. Unfortunately died last year, a young 58-year-old of cancer, but a phenomenal operator. So I no longer had to operate the business. But I was the face. I was this public face. But we kept changing that team, and that team operated. We saw that some people were running out of steam, and we would move them into different roles, and they understood that. And other people, we had to bring out people from outside, and we were probably, that team changed at least one person every year, more or less, not. And that's the reason I survived as the CEO, is because I wasn't the dictator. I wasn't the decision maker. I made very few decisions of any importance. I made the decision to sell the company. That was important. But other than that, the operating decisions were made by the team. And very rarely were we in such that we couldn't agree, and therefore I'd have to step in and make the decision. That was what I would have considered failure if I had to make a tough decision. The group made the tough decision. So whether we paid bonuses or not was not a decision I made. The group made that decision. So that's how I think I survived as CEO through 5 companies for 18 years. Otherwise, and I made a huge mistake. I did make a huge mistake. I did not take, and I don't know when I would have taken it, but I did not find a way to take sort of 3 months off and refresh. So I went through a period where I got really tired and really grumpy. And that was not a good period for me. Wasn't a good period for my family, and it wasn't a good period for the business. I then caught on to myself, and that's when I actually did the Vipassana retreat. But so I didn't value caring for yourself as much as I should have. Like, people ask me today, so how do I be successful? And I say, well, I think there are 4 things that are critical for being successful as a person in life, but particularly a person in business. Number 1 is you need deep domain knowledge in something. In other words, the reason you go to university is not to, what you get out of it is to learn. And today, you've got to know your shit. Whatever if you're in homelessness, you better know homelessness, right? And that's why this continuous learning and all that is critical. You got to have deep domain knowledge in something. Number 2, to be successful, is you got to know how to communicate. You got to know how to talk so people listen. I mean, the reason I believe that you have the election results that we had in South Australia, that you have sort of the political change that's happening, is politicians have forgotten how to communicate. And this budget 2 days ago is a phenomenal example of it. It's really shit communication. Successful people know how to communicate in plain language, and all that kind of stuff. Number 3 key attribute to success is you can solve complex problems quickly. And that's where it comes back to the one in the row thing and a bunch of that stuff. And number 4, which I didn't, I was pretty good in the first 3. Number 4 came later, and I realized its importance way too late, was successful people know how to take care of themselves. They have well-being skills, and they can be quite varied. I don't care what they are, but they devote time to taking care of themselves. And the number of executives, in particular CEOs or senior executives that I talk to, who build no time into their weekly schedule to take care of themselves, is amazing. Like, I ask, I won't tell you. How many hours in your working week do you block off and say, no appointments, nothing, this is my time? Most people say never. And I say, well, if there's one piece of advice I could give you over anything, is take 2 hours, at least. Be better if you took 4, but 2's more digestible. Take 2 hours, don't care when it is, block it off, and it's you do whatever the hell you want to do time. And often it's to think, to write, or to make 2 or 3 phone calls where you talk to someone to help you think things through, you know, whatever it is. But it's your time, and it's inviolate. You don't care if the house is burning down, that 2 hours is yours. And it should be 4. Think of it, 4 is only, 10% in round numbers of the so-called working week. Surely you're worth 10% of your time. But most people don't do it. And they suffer for it. Because my experience, having not done it and then starting to do it, is the other 36 hours are a lot more valuable. Because you're much clearer about what to say. No, not doing that one. Someone else can do that. Or, God damn it, I am doing that one, and we're going to figure out how I get to do it. I am going to meet that person, because that's really important. And we're going to make sure I do that, or whatever. And, and then things like meditation or whatever. It doesn't matter. Journaling. I mentor a couple of the Crows players, but I've done work on personal ethos, again, with all the 1 to 5s at the Crows, where they've each laid out what their personal values are, and then what are the behaviors that they have as individuals, what are the behaviors that they would want from the team, and what are the taboos. And I actually just did it with the whole playing group to create their ethos off of the Crows' 4 values, which are 4 C's, and really powerful stuff. But in doing that work, what I'm really amazed at how many of them write journals. I'm also amazed how many of them do yoga or meditate. And that's a really encouraging thing to see. The pressure there. I mean, being a 22-year-old professional athlete, getting paid a shitload of money, often not having a lot of friends outside of your team because you've come from Melbourne or somewhere and you don't know anybody. If you do know them, they all want something from you. So you can't go out to a restaurant without having 20 people come up and want a photo. So there's a beautiful, simple journal that I give them called the 5-minute journal. You answer 3 questions in the morning and 3 in the evening. It's really simple. Gets people started. So I don't care what it is, but structuring in time to care for yourself, minimally 5 or 10 minutes a day. But for anybody who's in serious leadership, I think it's minimally 2 hours a week, 2 hours a week, 5% a year. I mean, I know every CEO works more than 40 hours, or if you don't, I'm surprised. That's a good thing. You're better than I was, but because you're thinking about it, right? You may not be in the office, but you constantly work your heads. You got to clear that space, and you got to put a hard wall around it. And I think 2 hours is the minimum.